It's a special episode of Music is the Drug today, the first of a two-parter to celebrate the release of Cowboy Junkies' new album, Songs of the Recollection. It's an album of cover versions, but as Alan Anton points out, the Junkies don't really do cover versions the way other people do.
You know, we started out as a cover band. Pretty much, first album was all covers except for one song, and the second album was half covers. And live we played even more than that. So we always loved playing other people's songs, and so we've been choosing cover songs ever since we started the band, basically. So we all have our own favorites that we want to try, and we have to, obviously it has to work for the band, so we have to agree that it's something we want to try. And there's often ones that we think, oh, we're never going to get that as a Junkies song, and sometimes we do, and we surprise ourselves. So we never sort of categorically say that's out of our wheelhouse. We're not going to do that. So we try things and see if it works, and often a lot of things come to us, like for film soundtracks and things like that. Yeah, it's always different. We always have our own ideas. Other people suggest things, and there's always a stack of covers in the back of our minds that we want to try, that we get to every now and then. When we cover a song, we're not really covering it. We're just taking its elements and putting it into our sound. That's always been our approach. And we're also pretty irreverent as far as sticking to the original melodies, or guitar parts or bass parts or whatever. We'll just change everything around if we feel that it works better. So our idea of covering is not definitely not sticking to the original idea of the song.
The initial idea for the album was sparked by the COVID pandemic and the difficulties that lockdowns brought to doing pretty much anything for a while. But from there, the record took on a life and a concept all its own.
We were sitting in our homes, in our individual homes, all locked up, and actually somebody came to us with the idea of releasing something, because figuring we had an archive. So we sort of thought it through and realized that we did have a lot of songs that, first of all, hadn't been released, and some that had been released but were maybe a little bit more obscure and that we really liked, just like some individual covers that we'd done. And then also there was a couple of covers that were in our archive that I hadn't really mixed yet or anything, and that still needed to be maybe completed. And then a couple that we could do, since we've been playing them live, we figured we can kind of do them one at a time in the studio, sort of thing. Like, I'd put down a track and Pete would then play to that track. I'd send it out to Al and he'd play to it, and then Mark would do a vocal. So stuff that we could do in the context of COVID, and knowing that we could get good vibes on them or good grooves, because we played them live enough, so we kind of knew where the song should sit, So then we put it together, and it sort of became, once we sort of narrowed it down to nine songs that we liked, that we thought were strong enough, we sort of realized there was a little bit of an element of, kind of heroes. A lot of these people, a lot of these artists, and not necessarily even some of the songs, but certainly the artists, were people who kind of inspired us when we were young kids, before we were musicians, when we were becoming music fans, and when music was really changing our world. And when music was, just kind of, as I said, to put it straight, blowing our minds. That time you'd find a new record, put it on, and your whole worldview would change. And that's sort of, I think, why we became musicians, or certainly why I did, is that feeling of what music could do to you. I want to know if I had the ability to do that to other people, or to pass that along. And so these songs are sort of, especially like 5 years, David Bowie, and there's Stones in there as well, and Graham Parsons in that era, and of course Neil Young, Dylan's in there too. So those acts are really pretty vital to who we are and what we became and who we became as people, not just as musicians, but certainly as people. And then even Vic, there's a Vic Chestnut song in there, Marathon, and a Cure song, which weren't necessarily part of that same pantheon, but they were definitely, as when we became musicians, they became very important to us. Certainly, The Cure, was those first couple of records were very defining for Al and I when we were sort of figuring out what we want to do musically. So that was important. And Vic, as a songwriter, for me, anyways, has been very relevant. And I know from Margot as a singer, hearing somebody who's completely different than her, but can communicate such great passion has been important as well. So they all became sort of these touchstones for who we become and where where it started. As I said, we didn't grow up playing music together. We grew up listening to music together, and these are some of the artists that were very important in that time.
I think that's significant, that last bit you just said about listening to music rather than playing music, because that's true of a lot of these artists on here. You can hear the sound of people listening to one another while they're playing, and that's a defining characteristic of the Junkies as well, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this era, especially most of these tracks from that early '70s era, it's a very fertile era for music. It was recording technology for wasn't so far advanced that you could manipulate it too much after the fact and post production. You still had to record. A lot of recording was still done, in this live in the studio with musicians sitting there playing to each other, and that's really what we fell in love with, sort of that feeling of people communicating through their instruments, and you could really hear it. Obviously there's overdubs as well, but they're really, everything is sort of settled in on top of the bed track, which is the band, the core musicians playing music together. And I think that's what grabbed us, this way of communicating as when we were kids listening to this stuff, this way of communicating these ideas and feelings through music and through people communicating through their instruments, and without without consciously knowing that. I think that's why this type of music was so important to us, and why it captured us.
Pushing through the market square, so many mothers sigh.
Once we started playing it in rehearsal, we thought, oh, this is really fun. And it's always been one of our favorite Bowie songs. And for me, it's always been one of my favorite drum tracks in a rock song of all time, because the way it creeps in on the first, it opens the song on Ziggy Stardust, and that drum beat just creeps in and gets locked in your brain. And then same thing on the way out of the song. It's just the naked drum beat. And it's just such a simple, strong beat that it's always just struck me when I first heard it when I was a teenager, and stayed with me as one of the greatest, most powerful beats ever on a record. And the only one that I can think of that compares with that is, New Dawn Fades, the Joy Division song, which sort of does the same thing. Starts with this drum beat very similar and ends with it as well. And it's something about the way that works, which is just so, I don't know, so powerful. So this naked drum beat, not much to it really, but it just gets you hooked right into the song. So we like that aspect of it, and we were kind of worried about, can Margot sing like David Bowie? Because it's not an easy thing to do, and how do you put that across? But once we got into the song, we sort of built it up a bit and made it a bit heavier. Yeah, her vocals slid into it, and she figured out how to make it work in that. And it became, an encore staple for us for years after that. We've been doing it for, I think, 5 years, roughly, ironically, something like that. And always fun to play live, and always gets a kind of a kind of reaction from the audience when we first start it, because they're going, really? They're playing this song? And then they get into it, and then they get more into it, and because it's such a great song. So hard to go wrong with it.
Our covers are often, except for maybe something like Sweet Jane, which is our probably most popular cover, are usually pretty obscure songs. They're not necessarily your songs that people would necessarily recognize. Your even casual fans wouldn't, of David Bowie or of music in general, would probably recognize 5 years. We worked it up for we did a live show. We did a series of live shows with our label mates, Leighton Recordings, and we did different themed sets. And one set was called on various nights, and one of the sets was called Dead Heroes. So we all collaborated together and played songs by dead heroes. And David Bowie just died, and I think I was listening to Ziggy Stardust, and that 5 years opens that song, that album, and it's just it was so powerful at the time listening to it, and it's even more so now. I sort of began listening to it in today's 50 years later, whatever it is, and it has more resonance now than ever. So we just figured we'd work that up, and we loved playing it. We loved the way it felt for us. We loved the feeling it conjured, and the reaction it got in the audience, and so we've been playing it ever since. So I think it was about 5 years ago when we started playing it, and now we pretty much it's become sort of our encore song for now. Anyway, it's not every night, but quite most nights, and it's a lot of fun to play, and it's a great showpiece for Margot, especially live.
It's a great vocal on the recording. It must be a challenge, actually, for Margot to take on David Bowie, because it's so distinct.
And kissed the feet of a priest, and the queer threw walk back the side of that. I think I saw you in an ice cream parlor, drinking milkshakes, cold and long, smiling and waving and looking so fine. I don't think you knew you were in this song.
So iconic, yeah. I mean, I think at first it was, and then she's by now, like all our cover songs, it becomes, she and we just sort of becomes our own song, right? It becomes her own song. You kind of forget about that it's a cover, and you just play it as your own interpretation, and you just go from there. So I think she sort of left behind. It's a very close cover to David Bowie's version, but there's something about the way Margot delivers it just makes it hers, So I think that's the important part of it.
Covering a song from Ziggy Stardust was particularly important, given the central place that album has in the band's collective record collection.
Ziggy Stardust, that record to me, and still when I play it, that is in the perfect wheelhouse of my age, right? Like when that record came out, I was 13 or 14, and my older brother was a big David Bowie fan, and I remember sitting, being driven to school by him, and him playing his 8-track. I'm not kidding. Still to this day, when I listen to that record, I just get chills. It's obviously a brilliant record, but it's the time, and there's an awakening in me. I'm sure when I first heard that record, that record and Transformer are two records that just changed my life. So 5 years is the opening track of that record, and just the way it fades in, and that beat again, that we're talking about, there are elements of certain songs you have to maintain. We think that drum groove, obviously for 5 years, is one of them. For us, we just, you had to do that. And then, then it goes from there. That song is very Margot centric. She has to deliver the lines, and we just kind of play the chords. It's pretty straightforward. That early 70s period is huge for Al and I, and for our friendship, and for our how we communicate with each other musically. And so a lot of I think if I look at a lot of these songs are probably from that era, and it's always those records. A lot of those records are just ingrained in our souls. Like they're a part of our DNA. They're who we are. Ziggy Stardust for sure is just one of those.
We didn't get the full-on glam rock vibe that you had in England. It was huge in England, obviously, like with T-Rex and everything. But the only one that really came across was David Bowie as kind of representing glam rock, and then Queen, after that, but kind of less so in that it was more rock, big rock kind of lyrics and all that sort of thing. Whereas Bowie was, the intellectual side of that glam thing. And so I think in America and Canada, we had, the image of David Bowie and Lou Reed standing side by side, representing glam in 1972, 73. And that's when those records came out, which were pretty amazing at the time, because they were so different from everything else we were listening to, which was the Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd and Genesis and whatever was happening at the time. And here comes this really odd sounding and looking thing that was at first we didn't think we could get into it, but because it was so odd sounding and different, but we really grew to love it, and really appreciated what Bowie was doing with swapping out his sound every album and all that, which no other artists at the time. Maybe Lou Reed a little bit was doing that, but he sort of invented that really, and so that became a big kind of fun thing to follow him and get excited about what's he going to do the next record. And it was also different going from Diamond Dogs to Young Americans and all that stuff, and then into the krautrock thing. So he took us on a journey like no other artist, I think, did that. Every other band or artist sort of, give you a good record of what they did every year or two. But Bowie really took you on that special journey, and it was fun to follow him. You didn't know what it was going to be, but you knew it was going to be good because he had that track record after a few records. Yeah, like I said, it was just really, really exciting. He was one of the few artists to really be an artist, really do things that were challenging and unexpected.
Where 5 Years was recorded specifically for this album, Ooh Las Vegas by Graham Parsons was one from the archive, as Alan explains.
We were asked to do that song, so we didn't come to it ourselves. We were asked by Emmylou Harris to, I don't know if she gave us that song or if she had just said choose a song, but she was putting together the Graham Parsons tribute record, and we were lucky to be asked to be on it. Yes, it was a good one for us. It was easy for us to kind of interpret it in our style. It just had the right groove for us and the right lyrics. It was more of a narrative structure that we're kind of used to, or Margot would be kind of used to singing, less, of the hardcore country side of Graham. So that worked out really well.
This song, it was for a Graham Parsons tribute. It was done around the Miles from Our Home period. You can tell by the production, like lots of guitars, lots of vocals. And it's mixed by Chris Lord-Alge, who did a phenomenal job on it. I've always loved this. To me, this has always been one of my favorite standalone songs that we've done. Like a whole record done like this would be overwhelming. It wouldn't be that much fun to listen to, but one song is just so much fun. It's just really in your face, and it's due to Chris's mixing. He has a very specific style. He did all the Green Day stuff, and some huge hits. And I just love the way the groove is great as well. It's a great swampy groove. I like my guitar on it, and Margot's delivery is fantastic. I think it's just a great standalone track. It was one of those where I wanted it really layered and sent a lot of stuff to Chris, and he put it together. And I think he did a great job.
Take me to the station and put me on a train. I've got no expectations to pass through again.
This song we recorded. I think we did a Stones tribute record, and we did two songs. We did Moonlight Mile, and we also recorded this one at the same time. We didn't give them No Expectations. We gave them Moonlight Mile instead, and so this one has never been released. But I like it. I think we got a nice, again, very very simple song. I like the groove we got. It's very live in the studio, and it's just it's a great lyric too.
That's always been my favorite Stones record, Beggar's Banquet, because I love that, the rootsy stuff they do on that. And, Graham Parsons, speaking of him, he's been hanging out with Keith for 6 months before they did that record, and it was a huge influence on, that record being what it is, because Keith was sort of discovering American country music through Graham and through drugs at the same time. And, they just came up with this really, really energetic and kind of urgent sounding record of songs that really shouldn't be that way. Like if any other band had just sort of done those songs, written and done those songs, it would have been really kind of, countryish, lasyish stuff. But the way they do it, I guess they just can't help it. At the time, they were just such a powerful, really exciting sounding band. Everything they played and the way Mick sang with that urgency on everything was just astounding. I think that record I could never get tired of putting on the turntable.
Late 60s, early 70s, that to me is the Rolling Stones that I listen to, and that's what hooked me into them. Like the earlier stuff, I never got in. I never was that involved with, and I still don't. When I listen to those earlier records, I'm not a big fan of them, and the later records, nothing. But Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Exile, even Sticky Fingers, and that era, even It's Only Rock and Roll, I think is a pretty cool record. But yeah, especially the Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, those two records side by back to back are just that's enough to make a band's reputation right there on all levels. And when I listen to those records, I realize like the Americana side of it, this relates back to the Graham Parsons track. He's obviously a big part of the Stones experimenting a little bit with acoustic guitars and your early Americana really. And I didn't, you forget about those sorts of things, right? And I listen to those records now and I think, oh my God, this is what we do, and it's obviously in our head, right? It's obviously imprinted in there. We listen to those records so many times, but the mandolins and the acoustic guitar and the fiddle and on some of those records and just sort of the looseness of it is obviously it imprinted itself on us.
Especially with a song like that, which is so, such a blues song. It's so, it's the Stones interpreting the blues in their own way. And for us to interpret that interpretation that they're doing in our own way was, kind of hard to do. So we kind of stayed, straight to it because their arrangement is so nice on it. We just wanted to catch that vibe and, just have Margot singing instead of Mick, basically. I don't think we tried too hard to go our own way on the musical side of it.
That slide on it as well is such a lovely sound.
Yeah, that's Aaron Goldstein, who fantastic guitar and slide player. He plays a lot of pedal steel too, and he's been on quite a few of our records. He's definitely on All That Reckoning a little bit, and through the years he's sort of played off and on. And this was was recorded pretty early on when I just met him, and so yeah, he's a really beautiful player.
I think that was the last thing that Brian Jones did with him, wasn't it?
I don't think he played on too many songs on it. I forget exactly what, but yeah, I just remember the kind of sad image of him in the Godard movie of the making of Sympathy for the Devil, where he's just completely out of it and they're just throwing cigarettes at him or something. And yeah, he's, I don't think he knew where he was at the time.
No Expectations and Don't Let It Bring You Down are very live off the floor. A few overdubs for No Expectations, but the bed track is just us playing. And again, probably the first, second, third time we ever played it in the studio, and never played it again. I think we might have played it live a couple of times after that. So again, just capturing a vibe, right? And Don't Let It Bring You Down was recorded during the Sing on My Meadow session. So that was definitely very early, first couple of times we ever played it. And all that's live off the floor, everything, including the vocal. There's nothing added there. That's the five of us, including Jeff Bird in the studio, just sort of wailing away at it. And we did have another version that we're going to use that we recorded specifically for this record. But, I was sort of mixing it and it just wasn't, we've been playing it live for many years now. So, it goes in different directions. And I just happened to come across this version that's on the record that we never released. And I just like, again, you could only get that sort of looseness and that naive feel to a song early on, because once you play it too many times, you become too familiar with it. Doesn't mean it gets worse. It just gets different. And for the purpose of this record, I wanted it to, for as many of these songs, to have that very loose sort of, just live off the floor, like the era, like the early 70s era and late 60s era of making music. So we went with the version off of this version, which was off the Singing My Meadow sessions.
Pete's playing on it is great. I really love the way he plays on this.
Yeah, me too. And that's part. Pete doesn't stick with what he does. Pete changes all the time, so which is a really good thing. But and a lot of people do. But of course, if the drummer's changing, then the whole band is changing. And I really like the way you approach this version of it.
Really, it's the Crazy Horse groove that we love so much that when we started this band, we had that in mind. Let's not forget Crazy Horse. That's kind of our thing as far as grooves go. I always loved it. That and, Velvet Underground and, Joy Division to a certain extent. Those were our kind of big ideas to apply to, starting a band and seeing what we can do with that.
His music from a very early age, again, that early 70s vibe, has always been important to me. And he's got so many great records from that era that, you don't tire of them, because you can go for, I don't anyways, they're all a little bit different, but they all have that that sloppiness to them, that sort of tossed off nature. You can hear the band listening to each other and playing with each other, all that, especially the Crazy Horse stuff. And his guitar style, to me, that's a lot of my playing is kind of based on what he does, and there's an element of what he does that I bring to my own playing sometimes. He's one of those archetypes who's just he seemed to have followed his own muse, and it paid for him. He was in a great era to do that, at early 70s. And so we've done a lot of songs by him. They just seem to fall into what we do.
Woke up this morning with love in mind. It was raining outside, but my love still shines. Kept me warm until my plane touched the sky.
Love in Mind, it's from a very obscure Time Fades Away live record that Neil did, and I've always loved it. I just always loved the song. It's a beautiful lyric, very cool chords, very classic early 70s chords. And I can't remember when we recorded it. We recorded back, I think way back when. I don't know why we recorded it. Margot said she can't even remember recording it, but it was sitting in the archives, so we pulled it out and added a couple of things and mixed it.
You've said it sounds sloppy a couple of times, Neil Young and the Stones, but I mean, I suppose people see that as a pejorative term, but it's not. I mean, it's that sort of looseness. When you go back and listen to those 70s records, and then you listen to things in the 90s that were all done to click track and to Pro Tools and stuff, it's so much more. Well, it's a human record, isn't it?
Well, that's it. When I say sloppy, that's the highest compliment I can give. I think the proper term, you're right, is probably loose. It's people listening. It's humans playing. It's not humans playing and then putting through a digital machine that puts everything in perfect time. I mean, I do a lot of production now, and I don't use Pro Tools. I do use digital devices, but when I working with young bands, specifically, usually, it's sort of like, oh well, we do a take and they go, the drummer will, and I'll say, well, it's a little bit out of time here. Let's just do it again. It doesn't feel right. Well, can you just fix that? It's like, I hate that. Like, no, play the fucking song right. Just get a good feel. And then if it feels right, it feels good. Then we don't have to analyze every bar. And, if it falls out at a certain point, that's fine as long as the song feels good, And it's a real reliance on technology as opposed to playing, playing as a band and playing as a group and finding a group and sitting on it. And that's what those bands did, obviously, back then, because that's the only way you could do it. And you look at getting back to the Get Back documentary, and we talked about it in a previous podcast. You see that they're just playing, they're just guys playing, and then you realize how when they're playing on the roof and they show this is the version they use for Let It Be. You realize how loose those songs are. They're so loose. They're just there's nothing overly thought out about or analyzed or quantized or whatever. It's just guys, people playing together and listening to each other and reacting to what the other person's playing. And those Stones records of that era and from Neil Young of that era, that's exactly what it is. It's just, you rarely hear it anymore. It's and that's why those albums are so great to go back to, because it's communication, right? You're going back to somebody, a bunch of people in a studio expressing themselves and playing together and going, with us, that's, to me, I've always said that's why Trinity Session was such a success, because that for the first time in many years, an album was put into people's faces that was people playing together. Like we hadn't heard that in a while because of all the advancements in technology.
That's the needle lifted on side A of Songs of the Recollection, but we'll be back next week to cover the second half of Cowboy Junkies' new album. You can get it now from all the usual outlets or direct from the band at cowboyjunkies.com. They're back on the road again now, so you can check for tour dates there too. If you're a Spotify user, you can also follow our growing playlist. All the details of that and everything else is in the show notes. You can subscribe to the podcast at all the usual outlets, and if you're in a generous mood, you can add likes, comments and share the links there too. We'll be back to talk about the second side of Songs of the Recollection next week. See you then.